Hello class, and welcome to Notes 3.2, Adding and Subtracting Decimals, California Standard NS 1.2. Our objective today is to add and subtract decimals. You've been doing this for quite some time, so it should be mostly review. The only difference we have in here is, again, we're working with negatives, so it does make it a bit more complicated. Our rule for adding and subtracting decimals is to line up the decimal points, add or subtract as usual. My reminder to you is if the problem involves negatives, you must follow your negatives rules. For example, skip change, or secretly subtract. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at teacher example 1. This deals with just positive decimals. Should be nice and easy. First problem, we have 3 decimals. Notice this last digit does not have a decimal point. Remember, if there's ever a number without a decimal point, it means the decimal point's on the end. So this is the same thing as saying 2.0. So I want to go ahead and line up those decimals. And notice I added 2 zeros so that the decimals line up properly. And then I simply add 8 and 64 hundredths. Problem B, I have 4 and 9 tenths minus 2 and 76 hundredths. Now again, since I'm subtracting, I need to add a 0 onto this 9 so that it makes it a little easier to line it up. Notice I have to regroup because I can't do 0 minus 9, and I end up with an answer of 2 and 4 tenths. So after that, you want to go ahead and check your answers. And an easy way to check, you don't have to do a really in-depth check, but a really easy way to do is just to round the decimals to whole numbers. For example, let's say this was 6 plus 1 plus 2, I would end up with 8. And here, 5 minus 3, I'd end up with 2. Okay, and then when I go back and check my answers, 6 plus 1 plus 2 would give me 9, which is close to 8 and 64 hundredths, so I know I'm on the right track. And here, 5 minus 3 gives me 2, which again is very close, so it tells me that I am on the right track, that I probably did everything right. Could have made a careless mistake, but going back and checking that work will help take care of a lot of those. Now, teacher example 2 is working with negative decimals. This is where you want to be careful. So here, they're both negative. So I know I don't need to skip change, I don't need to secretly subtract. I simply add my 2 negatives together, lining up my decimal points, of course. I add them together, and right away I know 2 negatives, when I add them together, my answer is going to be more negative. And I have an answer of negative 18 and 3 tenths. Here, I'm subtracting, and I can never subtract with negatives, so I need to skip, change, and I end up here. Now I'm adding a positive negative, which means I'm secretly subtracting. I take the number with a greater absolute value, put that on top, the smaller absolute value on the bottom. I go ahead and I do my secret subtraction, and already I know my answer is going to be positive before I even do that subtraction, because this number has the greater absolute value. And remember, the whatever is on top has that greater absolute value, so I know my final answer will be positive. Okay, and let's go ahead and have you try some out on your own. I have 6 problems here. Be careful. Some of them do involve negatives, some of them don't. Think about your negatives rules. Go ahead and pause your video. Press play when you're ready to see the answers. Okay, welcome back. Let's take a look at number 1. I've lined up my decimals. I'm adding a positive and a negative, which tells me I'm secretly subtracting. And I'm with 2 and 703 thousandths. It is positive because 4 had that greater absolute value. Problem number 2, again, I am secretly subtracting, and it does end up being positive because 6 tenths had the greater absolute value. Notice I added a 0 on there to help line up my decimals. My final answer is 0 and 12 hundredths. Don't forget, you do need this 0 in front of the decimal point because that is the bodyguard. You can never just start off with a decimal point. You always need some digit in front. Problem number 3, I'm adding 2 negatives, so my answer is simply becoming more negative. I add all my numbers together, and I end up with negative 13 and 258 thousandths. I could have added a 0 on here if we needed to, but with addition it tends to be less necessary because you know 8 plus nothing is simply 8. But if it helps you to add a 0, go ahead and do so. Okay, number 4, we don't have any negatives in here, so we are simply adding. Add our 2 numbers together. Notice I added a 0 on the end to help even them out. 11 and 174 thousandths. Here, now, I've come to subtraction and I have a negative. That tells me I need to skip change. I'm now adding two negatives together, line up my decimals, and I end up with negative 26 and 91/100ths. Number 6, again I see subtraction with negatives, so I need to skip change, and I end up with a simple addition problem. Line up my decimals, I add them together, and I end up with 6 and 165/1000ths. Okay, another real short lesson for you today. Go ahead and go on to the quiz, find the sum or difference. Negative 0 and 37/100ths, plus negative 1 and 8/10ths. Number 2, 1 and 57/100ths, minus 9 and 28/100ths. Number 3, 29 and 1/10, minus negative 3 and 5/100ths. Be very careful. Remember your rules when working with negatives. Have a great day.